Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I am an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. The tension begins to coil tightly in the air as secrets unravel and hidden identities come crashing into the light, setting the stage for a day filled with emotional confrontation and dangerous choices. Remy Price stands at the center of it all, no longer hiding behind disguises or cryptic gestures, as he removes his wig and finally reveals the truth that has been lurking in the shadows. The mysterious phone calls, the unsettling presence that lingered just out of reach, it was all him, driven by a desperate need to reconnect with Melissa Dillon, the cousin he has been trying to reach for far too long. His voice carries a strange mix of confidence and urgency as he reminds Dillon of the role he played in her life, pointing out that he was the one who secured her position at that art camp. That opportunity, he insists, set off a chain reaction that introduced her to Electra Forrester and ultimately led her to a promising future at Forrester Creations. In Remy's eyes, he isn't just family. He's the architect of her second chance, and that belief fuels his expectation that she now owes him something in return. But the weight of that expectation lands heavily on Dillon, whose emotions are already tangled in conflict and disbelief. Just as she begins to process Remy's sudden reappearance, she is forced to reconcile it with the disturbing truth she recently learned from Electra, that Remy was the very person who tormented her through deepfakes, tearing her life apart in ways that still echo painfully. The revelation casts a long shadow over everything he says, making it nearly impossible for Dillon to separate the man standing before her from the damage he caused. Yet Remy presses forward, insisting that he has changed, that he is no longer the person who committed those acts, and that he deserves a chance to prove it. There is a calculated intensity in his approach as he shifts the conversation, steering it toward Deke Sharp, knowing full well that Dillon has built a strong bond with him. With unsettling precision, Remy corners Dillon into a position where refusal feels dangerous, hinting that if she wants to keep Electra unaware of their familial connection, she will have to help him mend fences with Deke. The request is more than a favor. It's a test of loyalty, wrapped in quiet manipulation, and Dillon finds herself standing on fragile ground, caught between protecting her friend and confronting a past she never asked to inherit. As this quiet storm brews, another layer of tension unfolds elsewhere, where R.J. Forrester's protective instincts ignite with fierce determination. His concern for Electra has grown deeper, sharpened by everything she has endured, and he makes a heartfelt promise to shield her from any further betrayal or chaos. There is sincerity in his vow, a genuine desire to be the one constant she can rely on in a world that has repeatedly let her down. Yet beneath that promise lies an unspoken uncertainty, because the truth is already slipping through the cracks in ways he cannot yet see. With Remy pulling Dillon into a web of secrecy, the very danger RJ is trying to guard against is quietly taking shape, threatening to reach Electra from within her own circle. The irony is almost tragic. His determination to protect her stands strong, but the forces working against that promise are already in motion, setting up a collision that feels both inevitable and heartbreaking. Meanwhile, across town, a different kind of emotional breaking point is unfolding, one driven not by secrets but by exhaustion and long-standing frustration. Hope Logan Spencer finds herself overwhelmed by the constant pressure and control exerted by Steffy Forrester Finnegan, and the weight of it all finally becomes too much to bear. In a moment of raw honesty, she opens up to Liam Spencer and Katie Logan Spencer, her voice carrying the strain of someone who has tried to endure for far too long. She admits that she feels unappreciated, pushed aside, and undervalued at Forrester Creations, despite everything she has contributed. The realization hits her with quiet clarity. Perhaps it's time for a change, time to step away from an environment where she no longer feels respected or seen. There is both pain and empowerment in her words, as if she is standing at the edge of a decision that could redefine her future. As the conversation lingers, the possibility of a bold new direction begins to take shape, hinting that Hope may soon make a move that alters not only her career, but the balance of power within the world she's been part of for so long. And as these storylines weave together, the atmosphere grows heavier with anticipation, each character unknowingly stepping closer to choices that will ripple through their lives in profound ways. Remy's manipulative push, Dylan's moral dilemma, RJ's promise, and Hope's awakening all converge into a single, powerful current of change. The calm is gone, replaced by an undercurrent of tension that refuses to settle, as every decision now carries consequences that cannot be undone. In this shifting landscape of loyalty, betrayal, and self-discovery, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing will remain the same once these hidden truths come fully into the light. The uneasy calm that follows Hope's confession doesn't last long, because in a world built on shifting loyalties and hidden agendas, every moment of reflection quickly gives way to the next wave of emotional fallout. As Hope sits with Liam and Katie, the reality of her situation begins to sink in even deeper, not as a passing frustration, but as a turning point she can no longer ignore. The idea of stepping away from Forrester Creations stops feeling like an impulsive thought and starts taking shape as a serious possibility, one that carries both fear and a strange sense of relief. Liam listens with concern, trying to understand just how far things have gone, while Katie offers the steady perspective of someone who has seen how toxic environments can slowly erode even the strongest resolve. In that quiet space between them, Hope begins to see her future differently, not as something tied to constant conflict and power struggles, but as something she may need to reclaim for herself. Yet even as the thought grows stronger, there is an underlying uncertainty. Because walking away from everything she has built is never simple, especially when so many emotional ties remain entangled in the same place she is trying to escape. At the same time, the tension surrounding Electra, Dylan, and Remy tightens further, as the weight of unspoken truths becomes almost unbearable. Dylan finds herself caught in an emotional storm, pulled between the fear of exposing Electra to more pain and the pressure of Remy's relentless expectations. Every word Remy spoke lingers in her mind like a warning wrapped in familiarity, especially the way he framed himself as both her benefactor and her burden. The more she thinks about it, the clearer it becomes that there is no simple answer, only choices that carry consequences no matter which direction she turns. The idea of helping Remy reconcile with Deke Sharp feels increasingly impossible, especially knowing the emotional damage already tied to his past actions. Yet, the threat of exposure, of Electra discovering their hidden family connection, hangs over her like a silent ultimatum, tightening the walls around her decisions until she feels almost trapped inside them. Somewhere in that emotional chaos, Dylan realizes that silence may protect Electra for now, but it also binds her deeper into Remy's control, creating a dangerous balance that cannot hold forever. Elsewhere, RJ's promise to Electra continues to echo with sincerity, but also with growing fragility, as unseen forces begin closing in around the very thing he is trying to protect. His determination remains unwavering on the surface, driven by genuine care and a need to be a steady presence in her life. But there is an undercurrent of tension he cannot yet fully understand. The reality is that protection becomes far more complicated when the threat does not come from a single direction, but from within a network of relationships already filled with secrets. As Remy's manipulation spreads quietly through Dylan's choices, the distance between truth and deception begins to blur in ways RJ cannot yet see. Electra remains unaware of the storm forming just beyond her line of sight, still believing in the stability RJ is trying to preserve for her, even as that stability begins to fracture piece by piece. The irony grows heavier with every passing moment. The more RJ vows to keep her safe, the more the hidden truths gather strength in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to surface. And so, as these parallel worlds continue to spiral forward, the emotional stakes rise to a point where every character stands on the edge of irreversible change. Hope edges closer to a life-altering decision. Dylan wrestles with a secret that could define her future. RJ holds on to a promise that may soon be tested beyond his control, and Remy tightens his grip on a situation built entirely on leverage and regret. Each path is moving independently, yet all of them are quietly converging toward a breaking point that no one can fully predict. The air is thick with anticipation, as if the next choice made by any one of them could shift everything that follows. And in that growing uncertainty, one truth lingers with undeniable force. What begins as hidden manipulation and personal frustration is slowly evolving into a chain reaction that will leave no relationship untouched once it finally comes crashing into the open. The tension that has been building in silence finally begins to press down on every corner of these intertwined lives, as if the walls themselves are closing in on truths that refuse to stay hidden. Dylan's internal struggle deepens as she isolates herself for a moment, trying to make sense of Remy's presence and the impossible position he has placed her in. The more she replays his words, the more she feels the weight of being pulled into a secret that was never hers to carry. There is a growing fear that every choice she makes now will either betray Electra or trap her further under Remy's influence, leaving her with no version of the outcome that feels truly right. The emotional pressure becomes almost suffocating as she realizes that silence is no longer just avoidance. It is participation in something that could eventually explode. And yet, speaking out feels equally dangerous, because the fragile trust she has built with Electra could be shattered in an instant if the truth comes out the wrong way. Caught in this tightening spiral, Dylan finds herself standing at the edge of a decision that could define not just her relationships, but her entire future. Meanwhile, Remy continues to move with unsettling confidence, as though he can already see the outcome he is trying to engineer. His focus on Deke Sharp grows sharper, almost strategic, as he attempts to use Dylan as the bridge between himself and forgiveness he has not earned. There is a calculated calm in the way he frames everything, as if every emotional wound he caused can be rewritten into something manageable if only the right words are spoken. But beneath that surface confidence lies something more unsettling, a refusal to fully acknowledge the depth of damage he inflicted on Electra, which makes his demands feel even more intrusive and dangerous. He pushes the narrative that he has changed, but the urgency behind his request suggests that redemption for him is less about healing and more about control. And in that tension, Dylan becomes the unwilling center of a plan that is growing heavier with every passing moment, as she begins to realize that Remy's version of reconciliation may come at a cost she is not prepared to pay. At Forrester Creations, RJ's protective instincts remain strong, but subtle cracks of uncertainty begin to form as he senses changes in Electra's emotional space. He notices small shifts in her energy, moments where she seems distracted or weighed down by something she cannot quite articulate. His promise to keep her safe remains firm, yet the complexity of what safe truly means begins to weigh on him more heavily. Protection, he slowly realizes, is not just about shielding someone from external threats. It is also about understanding the hidden emotional currents that may already be moving beneath the surface. What he does not yet know is that those currents are being influenced by forces he cannot see, stretching back to Dylan and Remy's dangerous arrangement. Still, RJ holds on to his resolve, believing that loyalty and love will be enough to hold things together, even as unseen fractures begin forming around the foundation he is trying so hard to protect. Across another emotional battlefield, Hope's conversation with Liam and Katie continues to evolve into something more decisive as she begins to fully confront the reality of her dissatisfaction. The frustration she has carried for so long no longer feels like something she can suppress or endure in silence. Instead, it transforms into clarity, a recognition that staying in an environment where she feels constantly undermined is slowly eroding her sense of self. Liam tries to steady the emotional weight of her words, while Katie acknowledges the courage it takes to even voice such a realization. In that moment, Hope begins to see that her identity does not have to remain tied to conflict at Forrester Creations, nor to the expectations that have defined her for years. The possibility of stepping into something new, something that belongs entirely to her, starts to feel less like escape and more like evolution. Yet even as that realization takes hold, she knows that leaving would not just be a professional shift, but an emotional rupture that will send shockwaves through every relationship tied to that world. As these separate paths continue unfolding, the sense of convergence grows stronger, as though each decision is quietly pulling the others closer to an inevitable intersection. Dylan's silence, Remy's manipulation, RJ's promise, and Hope's awakening are no longer isolated events. They are threads weaving toward the same unraveling moment. The emotional stakes rise not through dramatic confrontation, but through the slow accumulation of pressure that can no longer be contained. Every character is moving forward believing they are still in control of their own choices, unaware of how deeply their lives are beginning to overlap in ways they cannot yet see. And in that growing uncertainty, the story edges closer to a breaking point, where secrets will no longer stay buried, and every hidden truth will demand to be faced all at once. The sense of inevitability grows heavier as the story threads tighten, pulling each character closer to consequences they cannot yet fully see. Dylan finds herself unable to escape the echo of Remy's demands, even when she is physically away from him. Every attempt to regain clarity only leads her back to the same unsettling realization, that she has been placed in the center of a situation designed to limit her choices from the very beginning. The idea of protecting Electra by staying silent begins to feel less like protection and more like a fragile delay before something unavoidable happens. Yet the thought of speaking the truth still carries a sharp emotional risk, because it threatens to destroy trust she values deeply. Torn between these opposing fears, Dylan is left suspended in a quiet but intense emotional pressure that grows with every passing hour, as if time itself is pushing her toward a decision she is not ready to make. Remy, meanwhile, continues to operate with a disturbing sense of certainty, as though every piece on the board is already moving exactly as he planned. His focus remains fixed on maintaining leverage over Dylan, subtly reinforcing the idea that their shared secret is something that binds them together rather than divides them. There is a careful balance in the way he presents himself, shifting between reassurance and pressure, always making sure Dylan feels the weight of consequence behind any resistance. His insistence on reconnecting with Deke Sharp becomes more than just a request. It evolves into a test of control, a way to measure how far Dylan is willing to go under emotional strain. Yet, beneath his calculated exterior, there is an undercurrent of urgency that hints at something unresolved within him, as if this entire strategy is also driven by a need for validation he cannot openly admit. And in that contradiction, Remy becomes both the architect of the situation and someone quietly dependent on its success. At Forrester Creations, RJ's instincts continue to sharpen as he remains close to Electra, unaware of how close danger is creeping into her orbit from unseen angles. He reads her expressions more carefully now, noticing subtle pauses in conversation and moments where her thoughts seem to drift elsewhere. Although she does not reveal anything directly, RJ begins to sense that something beneath the surface is shifting, even if he cannot identify its source. His promise to protect her begins to feel more complex, because protection requires knowledge, and knowledge is exactly what he does not yet possess. Still, he remains committed, believing that stability can be maintained through presence, care, and emotional consistency. But the irony continues to deepen. The more he tries to anchor her world, the more unseen forces quietly push it toward instability from behind the scenes. Hope's journey, on the other hand, moves steadily toward a turning point that feels increasingly irreversible. Her conversation with Liam and Katie leaves a lasting imprint, not because it resolves anything, but because it clarifies what she has been avoiding for far too long. The idea of change no longer feels distant or abstract. It begins to feel like something she must confront with intention. There is a quiet strength emerging in her reflection, shaped by years of navigating pressure, expectations, and constant emotional turbulence. Yet that strength is also accompanied by hesitation, because walking away from Forrester Creations would not simply mean leaving a job, it would mean stepping out of a world that has defined much of her identity. Still, beneath the uncertainty, a new sense of possibility begins to form, suggesting that Hope is no longer just reacting to her circumstances, but actively preparing to redefine them. As these parallel paths continue unfolding, the invisible connection between them grows more pronounced, even though none of the characters can yet see the full picture. Dylan's secret, Remy's manipulation, RJ's protection, and Hope's transformation are all moving forward on separate tracks that are slowly converging toward the same emotional fault line. Each decision, each hesitation, each hidden truth adds another layer of pressure to a system already close to breaking. And as the day moves forward, it becomes increasingly clear that what has been building in silence is no longer sustainable. The story is approaching a moment where avoidance will no longer be possible. And when it arrives, every character will be forced to face the consequences of choices made in the shadows.